Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, let's discuss the complete set of rest assured automation testing interview questions and answers along with the preparation guide. Here we will discuss step by step what kind of questions they are expecting in the interview, how you need to answer along with coding level questions. Okay, so please don't skip anywhere and watch till to the end, and we will discuss only at very high level. Okay, and also if you want this PDF, I have given a link in the description box and also in the comment section. Please do check out. If you have any queries or questions, please do send an email to my email ID or drop a comment. Okay, so let's get started. So the initial set of interview questions are on the general API testing related. Okay, what is API testing? Why API testing is important? What is the difference between API testing and unit testing? What are the common types of API testing? What are the tools that are commonly used for API testing? And the next set of interview questions are purely based on rest assured specific related questions. Okay, so what is rest assured? And how do you set up rest assured in project? Okay, basically how you add the rest assured library to your project. Okay, you can tell with the version number. And how do you perform a get request using rest assured? Okay, you can exactly recall the method get method as shown in the code. And how do you validate the status code of a response using rest assured? Okay, and the next piece of code is related to how you send a post request with a JSON body using rest assured. Okay, and the next set of interview questions are about the HTTP methods and status codes. What are some of the main HTTP methods commonly used in RESTful APIs? What does the status code 200 mean? And similarly 201 mean? And what does the status code 400 mean? 401 mean? And 404 mean? And 500 mean? Okay. And how do you validate the response content type using rest assured? How do you validate JSON response data using rest assured? How do you log a request and response details in rest assured? And the next section, we have discussed about the authentication and authorization topics. Here you can expect the interview questions related to authentication and authorization, like how you handle basic authentication in rest assured. How do you handle OAuth 2 authentication in rest assured? What's the difference between authentication and authorization? And the next set of interview questions are about request and response specifications in rest assured. Okay, so what is request specification? How do you create and use a request specification in rest assured? What is the response specification in rest assured? How do you create and use a response specification in rest assured? Okay, and the next set of interview questions are about the headers and parameters. How do you add headers to a request in rest assured? How do you add query parameters to a request in rest assured? Okay, and how do you send cookies with a request in rest assured? How do you validate response headers in using rest assured? And the next comes the data handling part in rest assured. Here you can expect the interview questions like how do you validate a JSON array in the response using rest assured? And how do you extract a value from the JSON response? How do you handle dynamic data in API tests using rest assured? How do you validate that a key is present in the JSON response? How do you handle nested JSON responses? And how do you validate the response time of an API request? How do you parse XML responses? How do you validate that a list in a JSON response contains specific values using rest assured? And the next set of interview questions you can expect related to the advanced rest assured features. How do you configure rest assured to use relaxed HTTP validation? And how do you reuse request and response specifications across multiple tests in rest assured? How do you perform file upload in rest assured? How do you perform multi-part form data requests in rest assured? How do you handle custom deserialization in rest assured? How do you extract cookies from a response in rest assured? How do you handle redirects? How do you capture request and response logs to a file? And the next set of interview questions are related to the error handling. How do you handle exceptions in rest assured? What are the strategies can you use to retry failed test requests? And how do you handle rate limiting in API testing using rest assured in API tests? Okay. And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the performance testing. How do you perform load testing using rest assured? How do you measure response times in rest assured? How do you verify performance metrics like throughput and latency in API tests? And the next set of interview questions are related to API security testing. What is an API security testing? How do you perform SQL injection testing on an API using rest assured? How do you perform cross-site scripting testing on an API? How do you test for broken authentication vulnerabilities? How do you validate JWT tokens? Okay, and some of the questions related to the best practices. Okay, what are some of the best practices for writing API tests with rest assured? How do you handle versioning in API tests? How do you ensure your API tests are maintainable? How do you integrate rest assured tests with CI/CD pipeline? And the next set of interview questions are related to the data-driven testing. What is a data-driven testing? How do you implement data-driven testing in rest assured using TestNG? How do you implement data-driven testing using rest assured using JUnit? And the next set of interview questions are specific to the module mocking and stubbing. Okay, what is the purpose of mocking in API testing? How do you mock an API endpoint using rest assured? How do you integrate rest assured with wire mock? How do you set up and start a wire mock server for testing with rest assured? How do you configure a mock response in wire mock? How do you use rest assured to send requests to the wire mock server? How do you stop the wire mock server after the tests are completed? What are the benefits of using mocking in API testing? Okay. And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the data validation. How do you validate XML schema in rest assured? How do you validate JSON schema in rest assured? How do you handle optional fields in JSON validation using rest assured? Okay. And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the versioning and environment management. How do you handle API versioning in rest assured tests? How do you manage different environments like dev, staging or production environment in rest assured? And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the error handling and resilience. How do you test for error responses in rest assured? How do you handle intermittent failures in API tests? How do you simulate network failures in API tests? And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the miscellaneous questions. Okay, so kind of other questions you can expect in interview. How do you test APIs that require multi-part file uploads using rest assured? How do you handle different content types? How do you handle pagination in API testing? How do you validate deeply nested JSON structures? How do you validate the response of a post request with a payload in REST Assured? How do you use REST Assured to validate the status code and headers of a response? How do you send a put request with REST Assured? How do you validate a delete request response using REST Assured? How do you handle path parameters? How do you validate complex JSON responses that contain lists and objects in REST Assured? How do you set a custom request timeout? How do you validate multiple assertions in a single REST Assured request? Okay. And the next set of interview questions are with respect to the API contract testing. What is API contract testing? Why is API contract testing important? What are some of the commonly used tools for API contract testing? What is PACT and how does it work in API contract testing? What are the key components of an API contract? What are some of the challenges associated with API contract testing? How do you ensure backward compatibility in API contract testing? What is the difference between schema validation and API contract testing? Okay, so these are some of the important interview questions, guys. If you need this PDF, I have given a link in the description and also in the comment section. Please check out. And in the next section, let's discuss on the API automation framework part. Okay, on how the folder structure will be and what are the components it includes and what are the benefits of it and how to explain it in the interview. Let's discuss all this in the next video. And also, if you need the complete end-to-end full stack SDET interview preparation kit, you can use the same link that I have given in the description and also in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching my video. All the best for your upcoming interview. Happy learning, happy testing. Stay tuned for updates.